It's become a running theme with the Chopin preludes that many of them at their core are just songs, melody and harmony, where Chopin preludifies them, usually by doing something funky with the harmony. Case in point, if this was not a prelude, if it was just a song, there would be a harmony, probably with something like this. This is bog standard arpeggios for the romantic repertoire. And there would be a melody on top of it. Now, the preludification of this beautiful song is that the harmony, on every chord from the harmony, Chopin hits us with what I like to call sideway notes. So on this first chord, this F sharp major, besides these notes from the chord, Chopin hits us with these as well. Sounds very spicy. This isn't even that bad. If you rearrange them, you get a ninth. But for example, check out the sideway notes on this D sharp minor chord. Oh, there is no rearrangement that's going to make this not sound quite spicy. But in context, it's gorgeous. Here they come. Didn't that sound very beautiful? This is really the entire prelude. Well, there is a B section, which has nothing to do with this sideway note theme. It's still beautiful, though. I guess this makes it more of a nocturne than a prelude, but it's another discussion. So this is pretty much the whole prelude. We have a melody, a harmony, and the harmony always has these sideway notes that make it a little more dissonant, a little more spicy. So what I want to do in this episode is analyze the harmony to help you memorize the piece better. I found it quite difficult to keep track of all of these sideway notes, and I would sometimes play the wrong ones for different chords. Even in the B section, which has no sideway notes, something made it difficult, too much similarity made it difficult for me to memorize everything. But with proper analysis of the harmony and understanding where Chopin puts these sideway notes, you can memorize it much, much more easily. Before we do that, however, I want to review very briefly two techniques that are really prerequisites for playing this prelude, and we've talked about them before. So the first one is being able to play chords where you're emphasizing one note from the chord. We talked about that on the C minor prelude episode, so take a look at that episode. It is very important here because the melody is always given as the top note of chords. So you need to be able to play these chords, but emphasize the top note, the melody. There are a couple of other places here where you have to emphasize the middle note, for example here, or the bottom note, for example here. But throughout the whole piece, you need to be able to play chords and really make one of the notes in that chord ring out. The second thing you need to really have down is pedaling, mostly half pedaling. We talked about that in the A major episode. It is crucial for this prelude. Let me explain why briefly. If you look at the sheet music, you'll notice that Chopin only uses the pedal functionally here. He asks us to use legato without pedal. And then he uses pedal here just so that we can tie these two notes together, which are very far apart. And right after that, we're back to no pedal. Well, this might have worked on the pianos of his day, which had a lot less resonance, as we've discussed before. But on the modern piano, it is too striking of a difference to have some arpeggios be dry without any pedal, and then others with the pedal. The difference is just too stark. There's too much resonance that comes out of the modern piano when you have the pedal pushed down. So that really kind of forces your hand to play everything with the pedal. It's just way too dry without pedal. Given that you need to use pedal for every chord in the harmony, half pedaling becomes very important for two reasons. First of all, if you don't clear the pedal, you end up with too much muddiness. Recall how spicy these sideway notes are over here. But with some half pedaling, you can get rid of the dissonance before it gets too powerful, but still hold on to, for example, the rich bass note. There are also a couple of places where Chopin asks us to cut the melody off a little bit early. So usually the melody lasts 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Here is a place where there's a rest there. The melody should be cut off a little bit earlier. If you don't use half pedaling, if you just... Do you see how stark of a contrast this was? It was way too abrupt. So you need to be able... You do want to clear that melody and make it end earlier, but do it in a smoother way. The answer to that is half pedaling. So take a look at those episodes if you need a bit of help with half pedaling and emphasizing a note in a chord. If you can do that, the next step is to analyze a piece harmonically and understand where those sideway notes come in. So let's jump into it. There is a pattern that is true throughout almost the entire piece. Let's take a look at it for the first chord, F sharp major. The pattern is as follows. You have a bass note, which is the root. You're going to have the two sideway notes, which target a note from the chord. Okay, so we're targeting F sharp, we're targeting the root of our chord, and our sideway notes were a half step below, a full step above, and our target note. Once we're on that target note, we add two more notes from our chord, right? We're doing an F sharp major chord. The last three notes are over here, which are clearly F sharp. So to recap, the bass is the root of the chord, our sideway notes half step below, full step above, target note, three notes from the chord. This pattern has exceptions, but it is the rule proven by the exceptions. The opening harmony is dirt simple. It's the 1 chord F sharp, 5 chord C sharp. On that 5 chord, let's apply this rule. Our bass note is C sharp, that's the root. We're going to be targeting, this time we're targeting G sharp, that's the 5th, right? Recall that on the F sharp, we targeted the root note, we targeted the F sharp. This time on the C sharp, we're targeting the 5th. But our sideway notes are once again a half step below, a whole step above, target note, and then we end with 3 notes from the chord. These are 3 notes from the C sharp 7 chord. And now we're back to F sharp. We're going to go through the rest of the piece and figure out where these exceptions are, but keep that in mind. Bass note, sideway notes, usually half step below, full step above, target note, 3 notes from the chord. After this introduction, F sharp, C sharp, F sharp, C sharp, we have a little section where we're on F sharp. We go to the 6, this is D sharp. C sharp, that's the 5. Then we go to a G sharp major. Usually the 2 chord, which is G sharp in our key of F sharp major, the 2 chord is minor, but this time Chopin gives this to us in the major form. The reason for this is because it resolves to C sharp. Notice how the 2 chord, G sharp, if you make it major and a dominant, you end up with the 5, the dominant chord of C sharp. So that's why he gives this to us in the major form. Let's apply this rule to these new chords that we found. On this D sharp, we have the root in the bass. We're targeting a note from the chord, A sharp. Our sideway notes is a half step below, full step above. And the last 3 notes of the arpeggio are part of the chord. Rule applied. On the C sharp, it's just like we saw at the beginning. the first time we saw C sharp, we had a C sharp in the bass, we targeted the 5th, and we ended like this. This time around, it's a little bit different, but not by much. Our bass note has changed. It's no longer C sharp. Our bass note is G sharp, the 5, but we're still targeting a G sharp, the 5. And we end with 3 notes from the chord. On the major 2 chord, this G sharp major 7, we have the root in the bass. We're targeting the root, half step below, full step above, and 3 notes from the chord. And then we end on C sharp. I'll skip over this next section. It's another section that tricked me up quite a lot, but there is a pattern there. We'll come back to it at the end. The second half of the A section, it repeats. Same F sharp shenanigans to C sharp. Once it hits this F sharp 7, now we have some new chords. We have a section over here where the harmony is as follows. This chord that we landed on is it's a diminished 7th chord, and it's a diminished 7th that wants to resolve to G sharp minor, right? If you take this E natural, you move it down to a D sharp. We have a D sharp 7. D sharp 7 is the 5 of G sharp minor. So this diminished 7th moves to G sharp, D sharp 7, which sure enough moves to G sharp. Let's take a look at the pattern in the left hand. This is where things are a little bit different. On this diminished 7th and then on the D sharp, the sideway notes are a half step below and a half step above. Usually we had a half step below and a full step above, but now our target note is G, and our sideway notes are over here, F sharp, G sharp. And then we have 3 notes from the chord. On this G sharp, we're targeting G sharp. Sideway notes are again half step below, full step above, and with 3 notes from the chord. On the D sharp chord, we're once again going to be targeting a note with a half step below and a half step above. So we're targeting this D sharp, and we have this D natural, E natural. Notice how we have 2 G sharp chords over here. The first time around, we're targeting G sharp, and then the second time around, we're targeting D sharp. This is worth noting. Very often when you're playing a particular chord in this piece, so we're in the key of F sharp, if you're playing the 1 chord, F sharp, you're generally going to be targeting the F sharp note. The C sharp, when we go to the C sharp, we're generally targeting G sharp over here, the 5. So for the most part, well, maybe not actually most, but generally I would say there is kind of a rule. If you're playing an F sharp, you can kind of memorize that, okay, I'm going to be targeting an F sharp. If I'm playing a C sharp chord, I know I'm going to be targeting a G sharp. And I think it's good to keep that in mind and figure out where the exceptions are. But there will be exceptions. So here is an example where we have a G sharp minor chord where the target note has changed. The first time around, we're targeting G sharp, and the second time around, we're targeting D sharp. The rest is pretty much the same. We still have our sideway notes a half step below and a full step above. And we still end with 3 notes from the G sharp minor chord, but the target note is different. Now at the end, the last 4 measures here in the A section, the harmony is pretty standard. We're on this G sharp, which is our 2 chord. If you see a 2 chord, it's probably going to be followed by a 5 and a 1, and sure enough, G sharp minor, 5 chord, this is C sharp, to the 1. After that, we have a B major chord, this is the 4. The 4 chord the 4 chord goes to the 5, to the 1. So we have a 2-5-1, 4-5-1, okay? If it's not a 2-5-1, it's a 4-5-1. you can apply let's apply this rule that we talked about for these last chords over here, and you can start to notice that thing that I mentioned, that the target note for a particular chord is usually the same throughout, with some exceptions. So here come some exceptions. On the C sharp chord, we're targeting C sharp. But notice how at the beginning, the first time around we thought the C sharp chord, we actually targeted G sharp. But this time around, we're targeting the root. On the F sharp chord, again, this is the exception to the rule. We're now targeting C sharp, which is the 5. The first time around we saw F sharp, we targeted the root, F sharp. But I want to emphasize, most of the time when you see an F sharp, you're going to be targeting the F sharp. You can count them. Look at all the F sharp chords in this piece and see the number of times we target F sharp versus the few times, like over here, where we target C sharp. On the B chord, we're targeting F sharp. And then we repeat. On the C sharp chord, this is the same pattern. And then on the F sharp chord, same pattern. Before we go to the B section, let's take a look at the reprise of the A section. It's almost identical. We're on the F sharp 7. This time around, instead of hitting the diminished 7th chord, we stay on F sharp 7. See, we're targeting F sharp, half step below, full step above, 3 notes from the chord, and move to B major. Notice how on this B major chord, we're targeting F sharp, just like we did over here in measure 18 at the end of the first A section. See that? Afterwards, we have the same D sharp 7 that we saw before to the same G sharp minor that we saw before. After G sharp minor, the 2 chord, we have the 5 chord to the 1 chord. Now we have, instead of the 4 chord, we have G sharp minor, the 2 chord. This always kind of messed me up because this time around we have a G sharp, but the bass note is still a B, just like we saw at the beginning in measure 18. But we are, sure enough, on a G sharp chord, and we're targeting this D sharp like we do most of the times we have a G sharp. And then back to the 5 chord, to the 1. Oh, before the B section, I promised before the B section we'll briefly talk about this glue section over here, which seems random, but it's kind of not. Our harmony, let me just tell you what it is. We land on C sharp, and then we're going to have B chord, A sharp minor chord, C sharp 13, back to the 1. So it's a pretty standard harmony. 5 chord, 3 chord. My wife came in. Hello, wife. C sharp chord, B chord. So the 5 chord, 4 chord, 3 chord, 5 chord, 1. It's an interesting harmony. We can continue to apply the sideway notes concept, but things are going to get a little bit blurred. So on the C sharp chord, we land on C sharp. We're going to target this G sharp with these 2 sideway notes that are both a whole step above and below, and end with 3 notes from the chord. So our pattern still holds: bass, sideway notes, 3 notes from the chord. And the tricky thing is, now that we're on the B chord, we're targeting, we no longer have the bass note, we're targeting this F sharp. These are our 2 sideway notes. But notice how the first sideway note and the second sideway note are actually part of the previous C sharp chord. So on C sharp, we target this note, then we hit these 2 notes from the chord. And now this last note from that C sharp chord becomes the first sideway note for this B major. Okay? So these are our sideway notes. We target F sharp, we end with our B major chord. And again, this last note, this D sharp, which was part of the B major chord, becomes the first sideway note for our next chord, A sharp minor. We're targeting F, it's actually E sharp. So we're targeting the E sharp of the A sharp minor chord. And our first sideway note is this D sharp, which was the last note of the B major chord. Notice how even the second sideway note, this F sharp, is part of that B chord. Once we've targeted this E sharp, we outline our A sharp minor chord. And then once we're here, we go to a C sharp 13 chord. This is another standard romantic repertoire thing. The 5 chord often has a 13th, which has a big clash with the 7, but it sounds so beautiful, and this note, if you look at it, it's actually the 3rd of our 1 chord. So you'll see this a lot, these dominant 7th chords that have a 13th. So to recap, the tricky thing here is that this harmony, the notes from the chord become the sideway notes for the next chord. So C sharp, these 2 notes from the chord become the sideway notes for B. These 2 notes from the B chord become the sideway notes for the next chord, A sharp minor. And then we have C sharp. All right, that was a lot. It felt a lot like I was saying it, but just to recap, the chords are pretty obvious. You can see them in the right hand. The harmony is pretty straightforward, a lot of 2-5-1s. And the pattern is pretty straightforward. You have a bass note, you have 2 sideway notes, and then 3 notes from the chord. Just keep that in mind, and it will fall in place, I promise. Let's end with just a brief overview of the B section, and then we'll play the piece. In the B section, it helps to see some patterns. So the first 4 measures is basically a pattern that gets repeated. So we're on D sharp minor. We have a 2-5-1 here. We're landing on C sharp major, and we did 2 chord, that's D sharp minor, 5 chord, that's G sharp major, to the 1 chord. Okay, 2-5-1, 2. This is the 5 chord. Notice how the bass has this G sharp, and to our 1 chord. And now we're going to repeat in a different key. We're on C sharp minor, that's our 2 chord. Same pattern. 5 chord, notice F sharp in the bass, that's our 5. To the 1 chord, B. So 2-5-1 in the key of B major is C sharp, F sharp, B. In the next 2 measures, this is where it gets a little bit trickier to memorize, but in the first measure there is a pattern. Notice how we're just going to do B major, F sharp major, B major, F sharp major. We're on the B chord for 2 beats, F sharp chord for 1 beat, B chord for 2 beats, F sharp chord for 1 beat. So notice how the bass goes like this. So B chord, 1, 2, F sharp chord, 3, B chord, 4, 5, F sharp chord, 6, and then we're back to B. I don't have too much of a tip for memorizing the next measure, but just keep in mind that all we're doing in this whole thing is B to F sharp. So keep that in mind, where we're on B, where we're on F sharp, and the notes will kind of fall into place. In the last section over here, we're once again doing a 2-5-1 in a kind of funky way. So we're doing a 2-5-1 in the key of C sharp. So we're once again on this D sharp minor. Continue on D sharp. 5 chord is this G sharp 7. and we go to C sharp. So 2, 5, 1 in the key of C sharp. 2, 5, 1. It's kind of funky that the 1 chord is first in the sus form. Notice how we have this F sharp over here, but that gets quickly resolved like this. Okay, so 2, 2, 5, 1, sus, resolve the 1. And now the 1 chord, C sharp, recall that C sharp is the 5 of our original key, F sharp. So now we're going to use the C sharp chord as the 5 of F sharp, and now we've landed back in our home key. So keep track of the harmony, see some of the patterns, and this section as well will fall into place, I promise. All right, that was a lot of analysis. Wow, it is not easy to analyze a whole piece. It feels so obvious when once you have it under your fingers, but explaining it feels like just such a mouthful, even though, again, at some level, it's not that complicated. They're pretty standard harmonies, pretty standard progressions of chords. Yeah, I don't know. Music is hard. What can I say? All right, let's play the piece.